Good morning all. I'm Andrew Cooper. I'm a councillor in Kirklees, which isn't in Scotland, it's in West Yorkshire. Yes, I'm also a peer mentor for Green Council. So if you sometimes need a bit of advice, if sometimes you think you've got a few issues on your council where you might need a little bit of help, feel free to give me a call. I've been a councillor for 22 years, so I know a bit because I've been around a bit. So that's how I may be able to help. But my job here today is to introduce Rupert Reed to talk about the relationship between us as councillors and our campaigning role and how we relate to campaigners. Rupert's been the lead political strategist for the XR movement. He's an author, and I understand he's got some books here, just a few, here, which actually might have been signed by him already. And if it isn't, you can still try and get him to sign them over there. He's also on the list to be, if Boris Johnson decides to make 3 people into Lords, Rupert will be one of them. So we'll see if that ever happens.
And if there's 4, Andy will be one of them.
Always a bridesmaid.
Yeah, I know. So I'll try and get that image out of my head. So he's been a 2-term councillor as well in Norwich. So live from Norwich, Rupert Reed.
Thanks, Andy. That's kind. I'm going to try to get this out if I can. Yeah. Can you still hear me all right? Yeah, great. All right. So, yeah, great privilege to be here talking with AGC. As you heard, I was a councillor back in the day when there were a lot fewer of us. Back then, we used to sometimes describe ourselves as the sensible wing of the Green Party. Green Party's become perhaps even more sensible since then, and more professional, which is great. One way of thinking about what I'm going to say to you here this morning is that there's a risk that in a certain important sense, we might be taking that too far. I want to talk with you about power or principle, the false dichotomy. I want to talk to you about the ways in which power and protest can be 2 things that go hand in hand rather than opposed to each other. We've got a long time to have this conversation. There's all sorts of practical questions you might want to go into to do with questions like what do you do if you're on planning committee and you've been or still are a committed protester as well, or something like that. And we can get to those questions. I'm very happy to. I can speak to those from my experience, and I know there's other people in the room who also have relevant experience. But what I mainly want to do is I want to draw a wider canvas for you for this question. Because, well, we live at a moment in history when it's impossible to avoid that wide canvas, really. What am I referring to? So I want to offer you 2 unwelcome, uncomfortable facts. And urge you to consider with me the implications of those facts. So here's the first of those facts. The Green Party was formed 50 years ago to, well, save the world. The Green Party was formed to prevent ourselves going into a situation of dire climate and ecological emergency. The idea was that there could be a parliamentary road to ecologism, that through representative democracy in this country and around the world, we could put ourselves in a position to stop the human race from careening down the path that it was careening down then. And here's the thing, and this is the first uncomfortable fact, it's still careening down that path. The Green Party has not succeeded in its historic objective. And it is, at the very least, deeply implausible, and I would say more accurately, completely absurd to suppose that it is now going to do so. And we need to face this fact, because if we don't do so, then everything we do will be inauthentic. And I'll come back to the importance of authenticity in a minute. So there's the first of my uncomfortable facts, which I would urge us to look at and to embrace the consequences of. The project of the Green Party, when it was formed, the reason why virtually all of us got involved, is a project that is not going to be brought to completion. We are not going to save the world through parliamentary processes alone. On to my second uncomfortable fact. What do I actually mean when I talk about keeping the world safe? I mean, that's a big and complicated question that we could discuss, but there's a relatively easy, approximate proxy for it, which is that in terms of the greatest threat that confronts us, the climate threat, we've been told for some years now by scientists and governments that if we keep to below 1.5 degrees of global overheat, then we'll be keeping just about into the safe zone. So here's the second uncomfortable fact. We are not going to achieve that. We are not going to stay below 1.5 degrees of global overheat. How do I know that's a fact? Well, so I'm an expert reviewer with the IPCC, and anyone who follows what the IPCC have done will be aware that in the two epochal IPCC reports put out this year, the most honest reports the IPCC has ever put out, it's finally catching up with reality. It's a very conservative institution, it's always lagged behind the cutting edge of climate science, let alone the precautionary principle. In its reports this year, the IPCC said, for example, we need deep, rapid, and immediate cuts in order to stay below 1.5 degrees. And when they were asked, what do you mean by immediate? The reply was, we mean starting this year. Deep, rapid, and immediate cuts worldwide in global carbon emissions to stay below 1.5 degrees. Well, what is actually happening this year? Well, there are some good things happening. For example, some European countries, in response to the Ukraine crisis, are doing the right thing and reducing their dependence on fossil fuels. But are we seeing deep, rapid, immediate cuts worldwide? Are we seeing them in this country? We're certainly not seeing them in this country. Are we seeing them in the United States? No. Biden, for example, has granted more fossil fuel licenses than Trump did. Incredible, appalling fact. Are we seeing them in Russia? Are we seeing them in Saudi Arabia? Are we seeing them in India? No, I could go on, I could bore you. You know what I'm saying, and I can see your heads moving in the appropriate way. So the first fact was the Green Party has not succeeded in its historic mission. The second fact is, okay, it's too late for the Green Party to succeed in its historic mission. Can there be success anyway? Can other governments see us through? And the answer to that is no. We are not going to stay in the safe zone. We are in the age of consequences. We are in a situation of historic, unprecedented instability. We are moving into terra incognita, and we are not going to succeed in extricating ourselves from that situation. What are we to deduce from these two unwelcome facts? What ought we to do with them? Well, let's start with the second of these facts. There really isn't any excuse for us not to come clean with people about the second uncomfortable fact, the fact that humanity is already moving out of the safe zone, that we are not going to stay below 1.5 degrees. Because in relation to the fact that we have relatively little power as Greens in the ordinary sense, there is one great power that we do have, which is that we are the trusted voice on climate and ecology and nature in the political sphere, in the electoral sphere. People look to us, they listen to us in this regard. We need to tell them the truth. And of course, the remarkable fact about success in the last few years of the radical flank of the environmental movement, the remarkable success, the unpredicted success of Extinction Rebellion, of Greta Thunberg, etc., is that that was all based in a fundamental attitude of responsible, authentic truth-telling. The reason why Greta and XR cut through where the environmental movement had failed for years over and over again to do so was because we stated in no uncertain terms just how bad the situation was. And we stated it not only in factual terms, but also with the relevant due emotion. That's the genius of Greta, to just be who she is. And it's also a propensity and an ability that some of us in XR, I think, also managed to manifest through the media, etc., especially in 2019, to cut through. The power of truth is a great power, even for those who are in the contemporary representative democratic system, like ourselves, relatively powerless. So there really isn't any excuse for us not to tell the truth about how bad the world situation is. I'll come back to that point. But now let me turn back to the first fact. What about that? Should we come clean about that? Well, that, of course, is even more difficult, right? The last thing any politician wants to do is to stand up and say, we have failed in our historic mission. The Green Party is not going to save you. It sounds like you're saying to people, don't bother voting for us. Right? It's a very, very difficult thing to do. So it's deeply understandable that Greens have been reluctant to do anything like that to date. But I want to put it to you that that is exactly what we should do. And the reason we should do it is firstly because it's true, right? But there's another reason as well. And here we start to get to my point about power and principle being a false dichotomy. If we were to do that, we would be manifesting in a most profound and difficult and humbling and humbled way our powerlessness and the incapacity of the current political system. We would be manifesting authentically. We would be doing exactly what Greta and XR have done, which enabled them to cut through. If we were to say to the British people, if we were to level with them and say, you know what, you cannot look to us any longer to solve this through the parliamentary process, through the representative democratic process exclusively, that is not going to get us out of this. In fact, in a certain sense, nothing is going to get us out of this, but in terms of getting us through this and getting us through what is coming, I'll talk about that more in a moment. Right? You cannot rely on us alone to do it. If we were to say that, if we were to be honest enough to admit that, that would be news. That would be a man bites dog story, right? And we would be listened to partly because we do tend to be respected more than other politicians as it stands anyway, as being truth tellers, but also because people would be able to see that this was a difficult and very unusual thing for a politician to do, right? People are completely used to politicians standing there saying, we're going to sort out all your problems. They're going to be sunny uplands. Everything's going to be fine. We've got the solutions. And as Greens, we love to come to people and say, we know what all the answers are. We've got all the policies, etc. We've got this enormous list of policies and they're all brilliant. If you only give us the power, we'll put these into action and everything will be fine, right? And we've been doing that for year after year after year. And we've got somewhere with it, but not far enough and not fast enough. And that's what we need to admit now. And if we were to admit that, if we were to be big enough to say to people, you cannot rely on us, you cannot look to us to solve this for you, that isn't going to happen. It was reasonable perhaps to hope 50 years ago that it might happen, but it isn't reasonable any longer. Then we would cut through and it would be news and we would be manifesting the same authenticity that has resonated so strongly when it came from Greta and from XR. What's more, here's the beauty of it. Here's where we really get to the nub of the point about power and principle being a false dichotomy. If we were to do that, that is the one chance we might have of actually, in quite a dramatic way, turning the situation around. If we were to manifest that authenticity, that's what people are hungry for. That's what people are hungry for. That's why Corbyn was elected Labour leader. That's why Corbyn did so incredibly well in that 2017 general election. That's why Bernie Sanders twice, despite the institutional corruption of the Democrats, almost managed to become their presidential candidate. And again, that's why Greta cut through. That's why XR cut through. And that's why already Greens do cut through to a remarkable extent, given how poorly resourced we are, how up against it we are in a first past the post system. That's a lot of the secret, for example, of Caroline Lucas's success, that she comes over to people as a more believable, more authentic voice than almost anybody else in politics. That's why so many people say she's the best MP of the lot of them. You know, she's the best parliamentarian in Westminster. What I'm saying is we need to take that power, that kind of power that we know that works, and we need to ramp it up. It's what Václav Havel, one of the great theorists and practitioners of the 1989 Velvet Revolutions, in Europe, called the power of the powerless. Yeah, when we come clean about our lack of power within the existing political system, when we admit our inefficaciousness, then we suddenly have a kind of power that we didn't have before, and that just might resonate with voters in a profound way, and actually, paradoxically, propel us to much more power than we currently have. Let me give a couple of examples of how this power of the powerless works. So one example from my own personal experience is that 6 years ago now, I started giving these kinds of talks where I said, we need to come clean about how bad the climate change situation is. And these talks resonated as nothing I'd done before in the whole of my previous life had done. And I found that I'd found my life's purpose, and it was a great thing for me. It really started to happen. It really started to scale up in the autumn of 2018, when at the time that Extinction Rebellion was being formed and we were getting ready to launch publicly, I gave a talk with the title, "This Civilization is Finished." I gave this talk at Cambridge University. And I started off this talk with these words: I'm here to tell you, young people in the room, so mainly talking to students, that your leaders have failed you, your parents have failed you. Even though they love you, they've failed you. Your teachers have failed you. They're trying to do their best for you, they've failed you. The environmental movement has failed you, and I failed you. And that admission of powerlessness and of failure, it made some kind of connection that nothing I'd ever done before had made. And that talk has been watched by hundreds of thousands of people. Many people who came to take part in the Extinction Rebellions in 2019 said to me, you know, it was that talk that inspired them to do so. And now for a bigger example, and one from the Green Party itself. Alison Teal, councillor in Sheffield, ex-councillor now, who many of you will be aware of, did a remarkable thing in leading this protest against the tree felling in Sheffield. And many people at the time were saying, oh dear, this could be difficult, you know, this could be difficult at the ballot box. Are people really going to go for a councillor who does non-violent direct action? Is that really going to work? You know, if you've been elected by voters, shouldn't you just go into the council chamber and do your business there and not get dirty on the streets and end up in a cell and so on and so forth? And of course, what actually happened is that campaign was enormously popular and eventually more or less successful. And Alison was re-elected with a massive majority, with a much bigger majority than she'd had before. That's a tiny proof of concept in what I'm talking about here. Power and principle and protest can all go together. If you act on principle, if you protest as well as acting through ordinary political means, that can get you closer to power than you had before. And you'll all be aware now that the Greens are in a better position in Sheffield than they've ever been. Their rise has continued. That's a miniature proof of concept of the argument that I'm making at large. So here's the beautiful paradox. If we admit our powerlessness, if we admit our inefficaciousness within the current political system, we could actually get more power through that system than we've ever had before. And this is the central idea of the little organization that Alison and I founded, called Greens Can, Greens Climate Activist Network. And what we're trying to say to the Green Party is what I'm saying to you here this morning. What we need to do, it's very hard, but what we need to do is to face and to state these two facts: that the world is not going to be saved, and that if it were going to be saved, it damn well certainly wouldn't be us through parliamentary, political, representative, democratic processes who are going to save us. That it's too late for the former, and it's most definitely too late for the latter. Both these things are very hard to say, and it's especially hard for us as Green politicians to say, our way of trying to do this, of trying to make change, of trying to save you all through the ballot box, etc., is not going to work. But if we were to do it, it would give us a kind of power that we've never had before. So, what follows from this? If we're going to take this kind of radical strategic move, this very different, unexpected political strategy and common strategy, if we were to take this route, which would give us a kind of platform and enable us to be listened to in a way that we're mostly just not at the moment, what would be the implications for us in terms of what else we would have to do and say? So I'm going to focus just on two before I bring this to a close, and then we have a long time to chew all this through. The first is that once you admit that we are out of the safe zone, that we are not going to stay below 1.5 degrees, that the world is headed into a terrifying era of climate injustice and damage. The first implication of that is you have to take adaptation and resilience building more seriously than you did before. You can't put the emphasis so strongly as, for example, Extinction Rebellion has done on mitigation, on prevention alone. We are not going to prevent dangerous climate change. It is here. It has been here since about 2016 when the world's weather started to spin out of control. We are not going to stay below 1.5 degrees. Most people do not want to admit that. People in the Green Party don't want to admit that. Green NGOs don't want to admit that. They'll admit it privately. Lots of them have said it to me when I've challenged them over this in private. Why don't they admit it in public? They're worried that they're going to demoralize people. They're worried that they're going to be attacked. These are reasonable worries to have. But what I'm suggesting to you is that the truth is actually on balance the reverse. Yes, there will be some attacks. I've suffered some attacks. Extinction Rebellion has suffered some attacks for saying these painful truths. But on balance, telling the truth works, and we need to take it further, right? So what I'm saying is, on this point, is we need to go further into the truth that, given that we are in the age of consequences, we need to adapt. We need to build resilience. That is the number one priority. It's not enough to talk about 2050 or 2035 or whatever any longer. We're talking about what's here now. And remember that Britain has actually been lucky so far on this front. Anyone should be in a position now to look around and join the dots. Look at the wildfires in Australia, look at the heat wave in France, look at the terrifying floods in Germany and the Low Countries, look at the appalling heat dome in America and Canada, 50 degrees in the Arctic Circle last year. Britain has been comparatively lightly affected in the last few years by this terrifying turn in our climate damaged weather. That luck will not last, right? It's coming for us. You know, you may not be interested in climate change, but climate change is interested in you. And sometime in the next few years, we're going to suffer some kind of savage climatically caused disaster or disasters. And we need to be ready for that. And of course, one of the beauties of your position as Green Councillors is that you're well placed to do something real on the ground about adaptation and about resilience. So we need to have a stronger emphasis on adaptation, and the right kind of adaptation needs to be transformative adaptation, not the kind of shallow, incremental defensive adaptation that merely tries to sort of build higher walls to keep out the rising waters. We need to actually transform our system at the same time. We need to mitigate at the same time. We need to work with nature rather than against nature. We need to engage in transformative adaptation. We need to confess our vulnerability. We need to build resilience. And if we do so, here's the beauty of it. Again, we'll be making the crisis more comprehensible to people. We'll be making it more real to people. When you talk to people about 2050 or 2035 or 2030, it all sounds awfully far off to most average people. When you say to people, we're in danger now, and we need to act now to start to make ourselves a little bit more resilient against that danger, more food resilient, more flood resilient, etc., then people start to get it. And when you actually start to do it, when you start to actually put in place adaptation measures on the ground, then they really get it. They're like, oh, they're actually changing the way that they farm. Oh, they're actually recreating that wetland or putting those measures in place to make sure that more water is absorbed in the uplands and it doesn't all just come whooshing down here. They're doing that right now because we're vulnerable right now. People start to get it. When we do adaptation, don't just talk about mitigation, people start to get it. And one of the reasons why most of the green movement today has been so fixated on prevention and mitigation is precisely because it doesn't want to admit the painful truths that I've been saying. Right? As long as you continue to go on about 2050 net zero or 2030 net zero, as long as you continue to talk about mitigation and prevention, you're keeping at arm's length this painful knowledge that the crisis is here now, and we are not going to solve it. This is not a problem that is going to be solved. It is a new permanent condition we are in. Some people call it a long emergency, but really it's even worse than an emergency. Because an emergency is something you can imagine getting through and getting beyond and getting over and leaving behind, right? This is not going to be like that. We're in a new permanent condition. As long as we make it seem to people as though somebody's got this, The government's going to sort this. The scientists are onto this. The corporations have got it. The activists are onto it. The Green Party, well, they might come to power one day. You know, they might sort it out when they eventually come to power. As long as we allow people to do that, we're allowing them to outsource the problem, to think it's not our problem, it's not here, it's not now, it's not really urgent. We need to make it urgent, present, here and now for everybody. And this is how we do it, by telling the truth, and in particular, the thing I'm saying right now, by focusing on adaptation and not just on mitigation. And the second implication, this is my final point, and here we come back to the point of protest. If we mean all of this, and if we're prepared to go down this kind of route, then we need to be congruent in our actions with our words. So yeah, it's like doing adaptation, not just talking about adaptation. Also doing non-violent direct action and not just talking about it. And if we mean it, that we're not going to sort this through the conventional political system alone, then it follows that we need to move beyond that. And of course, this has always been there in the Green Party's philosophical basis, which makes us unique compared to other parties. Right there in the philosophical basis, it says, for some issues of sufficient importance and urgency and moment, action through the ballot box, democratic, normal procedures alone are not enough. We have to move beyond those as civil disobedience. If we were to, en masse, if the most sensible wing of the party even, dare I say it, were en masse to say, you know, what we do, what we've been elected to do by people, it's brilliant, but it's not enough. That would be an incredible, powerful message. Do you see what I'm saying there? Every single elected Green has a particular responsibility here. Every time an elected Green does non-violent direct action that makes sense to people, they're saying through their actions, the system alone, as it's set up, normal democratic representation is not enough. We have to go beyond it. That's power. That's something that's really powerful. That's how we break the illusion that there's an antipathy between power and principle and protest. So that is the Greens can strategy in a nutshell. We can discuss it now, but if you like what I've been saying, I would urge you to look into it further, go to our website, see what is there. A number of prominent people inside and outside the Green Party are behind what we're trying to do. A number more are behind it, but are not willing to admit it yet. But they will. There will come a time. There will come a time when everyone will see that there is no choice but to go down this kind of route. Here's the point. The sooner we get to that point, the more we can start to use this great power of the powerless, this great power of authenticity, and actually start to make the difference that needs to be made before it's too late. Not before it's too late for there to be serious damage and for us to be unsafe and to be in the age of consequences. That is baked in. But before it's too late to make as much difference as we can make. And when you're retiring or on your deathbed or whatever it might be, talking with your kids or your nieces and nephews, whatever it might be, that is, of course, the only question that they will be interested in generations or a generation or so's time. Did you do all that you could while there was time on this most important, most determinative issue? The issue that the public trust us on, that we get listened to on, that we have voice on, even when we have relatively little conventional power. That will be the only question that they're interested in. And what I'm urging you to do is to be able to give a positive answer to that question. And I think that's what I've sketched in this talk here this morning. Thanks for listening.
I don't know if this, no. So we're going to go to gallery view now, so we can, the people who are joining us at home are able to involve themselves, and so at least one person's raised their hand. Just before we sort of open it up, a bit of a question for you, I guess, Rupert, which is, people are not very sophisticated, are they? And the media is not very sophisticated, and I think, I do wonder whether the headline is Greens say no hope is one of the problems that we've got here. And you say that we're admitting our powerlessness, But actually, there are some very powerful things we can do about adaptation. So I just wonder whether there's a bit of a contradiction there. And we often think about adaptation being about planting trees or in a flooding type context. But some of that resilience is about the economic systems. It's about the supply of essentials, about food and energy and all those sort of things. So just could you say a few things about those comments and tell me why I'm completely wrong?
Yeah, thanks, Andy. And of course, you're basically right. The media will try to oversimplify.
Yeah.
But we have to keep on coming back and introducing a little bit of complexity. It's only a little bit. So here's the basic dichotomy which people try to present here. They try to say either it's too late or it's not too late. Either there's no hope or there's hope. But the question to ask always, when anybody says anything as simple as that, as simplistic as that, is too late for what? Or hope for what? There are things that it is too late for. It is too late to hope for a smooth and serene transition to a post-carbon economy. We could have perhaps managed to do that if we'd have started about 40 years ago. If there had been green governments in power throughout the world 20 years ago, perhaps we could have achieved that kind of transition. It's too late for that. It's too late not to be in the age of consequences. It's too late not to take adaptation seriously. It's too late for us to stay in the safe zone below 1.5 degrees. But then there's all the things it's not too late for. Right? It's not too late probably to stop ourselves going beyond 2 degrees. It's not too late, it's never too late to do the right thing. It's never too late to reduce harm. It's not too late to transformatively adapt. So this kind of simplistic attitude of either there's hope or there's no hope, the kind of way that people flip from everything's going to be fine to doom, there's nothing we can do, is the problem. And we need to address that, and we need to be explicit and clear and firm about that. And so, yes, people, if we take this risky comms maneuver that I'm describing here, there will be all sorts of misunderstandings and attempts to mischaracterize and so on. But we will start a debate, and we will be listened to if we ever dare to say this. And as I say, I'm convinced we will say it sooner or later. It'd be so much better to do it sooner. We will be listened to, we will start a debate, and we will get the opportunity to make some of these points and make some of these very, very simple, much needed clarifications. Because the thing which is so terrible about the everything's going to be fine versus we're doomed thing is that both are positions where you're actually not feeling any real agency. Right? Both are positions where again you're outsourcing. You're saying somebody else is going to take care of this, or as it were, God has already taken care of this, and there's nothing we can do, right? What we need to do is put ourselves in a position where we give ourselves agency and where we make sure that citizens step up and take the agency which they need to, which they must, if we're ever actually going to get anywhere with this. We need much larger numbers than are present in any political party or in XR or even in the school climate strikes, right? Those numbers can only be found if we stop people being able to outsource this, being able to say, basically, this is somebody else's problem. If we get people to realize, no, this is only going to get sorted in as much as it is going to get sorted if we together express our clear collective agency. And what we need to do that is to be realistic about the things which we have to abandon hope for, and about the things we need to focus on and actually try to achieve.
Thanks for that very clear response. I'm going to go to Georgia Taylor first in East Sussex. Georgia.
Well, first, I want to thank you, Rupert, because every full council in East Sussex, we have a diverse demonstration, and us four Green councillors, we always join in for council meeting, and we get severely criticised for that from the Conservative Council. Exactly what I'm going to say in my speech in the next full council. Thanks for that wisdom. I wanted to ask you about something else, though, which was because I'm also in the Climate Emergency Policy Working Group, and we're about to bring to to conference a motion where we're going to have to drop from our policies the 2030 target. And the reason for this is because our policies, even though they're more radical than any policies of any government or other political party, our current policies are not going to get us to 2030, you know, to keep us below 1.5 degrees and get us to net zero by 2030. So we have to, if we were to keep that target, we have to recommend even more dramatic changes. And we probably, you know, the general consensus is that we wouldn't actually win any elections if we went even more in that direction. So, you know, this is just a question about that, because I think our group is very keen to keep a 2030 target, but we know that we're lying if we keep it. So we'd rather tell the truth, but then how do we steer the party towards something that's going to be even more dramatic? And just to say that, you know, obviously the adaptation aspects of this are very dramatic as well and could be pretty unpopular. So that's something that us councillors sitting in councils are very aware of as well. But we do already push adaptation, and, you know, plans in East Sussex don't currently include anything on adaptation. So we're pushing hard for that. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And, you know, what I'd like to start by saying is well done for looking at this in an honest way, and what you're describing in terms of what's happening there with your group at the national level in the party and locally. That's really encouraging. That's the kind of thing that we need more of. So what would I say in relation to the 2030 target? Yeah, it isn't credible. And it would be pretty much unachievable. And even if it was achieved, it would not keep us below 1.5 degrees. Even if it was achieved, it would not keep us below 1.5 degrees. But it's not going to be achieved. So the best thing to do is to drop such fantasies. What should we have instead? We should simply say very, very loudly and clearly, we need to do everything we can as soon as we can on this. We need to make cuts in emissions as fast as we possibly can. Don't go on about dates, don't put it into the future, just make it be about now. And make it be about now also, even more crucially, as you've been saying and I've been saying, by focusing a lot more effort and attention on adaptation. And that's how we'll make it real to people. You say that adaptation policies can be unpopular, but they can also be quite popular if you do them right, and if you present them right. People like to have a greater sense of security. A lot of what transformative adaptation involves nature restoration and taking care of nature. And re-beautifying significant parts of the country. There's actually big constituencies for that. And of course, in terms of both adaptation and mitigation, if you get it presented right, there's what I call the beautiful coincidence. The beautiful coincidence is that, by and large, the very things we need to do in order to deal with the climate and ecological emergency are the very things we need to do in order to make our lives better, to relocalize our food systems, for example, to be having less commuting. We've seen some of the benefits of that in COVID. You know, the COVID dividend mustn't be lost, as some of it's at risk of being lost at the moment. So that is what I would urge us to do. Look for the win-wins here, but where necessary, err strongly on the side of truth, because some of these truths are going to be comfortable, and some of them are going to be uncomfortable. And it's by going with the uncomfortable ones, even when it's difficult, that you actually get credibility, and that you actually get into a position where people think, oh, these are not just like other politicians, and we can actually trust what they say. And they are actually a beacon through these difficult times.
Okay. Jonathan Essex. Yeah, we'll get through. So if people could be quick, and then we'll get as many people as we can.
Okay, so my pitch is there a third uncomfortable truth we need to look at, which is the way that our current politics and economics is in not dealing with climate change is driving rapidly increasing inequality in the UK and globally. and admit that the failure to address climate change is implacably linked to this wider democratic failure, sharp rises in child poverty, homelessness, banning of refugees from Britain. And the adaptation that you talk about means that we need a far radical social justice and equality agenda to underpin the radical, far more radical than current climate agenda that we're talking about. So as well as the NPDA, then it's about maybe community embeddedness and community responses to get the stronger communities that are needed to address the inequality locally. But also in terms of the policy debate, rather than saying either we can't do the 2030 because we're relying on technological changes mainly within the current economic system, or stop it, we should be more honest that talking about localism and less people commuting as a behaviour change message from the public sector, the IPCC say that idea of behaviour change separate from economics and politics will achieve no more than 5% change by 2050. What we need to do is legislate and basically require localism, just like we required no smoking in public places. We need to legislate a lower level of car ownership and so on. Otherwise, it will not happen. And we need to be honest with the policies and the way they need to be delivered to mitigate. Otherwise, it drifts into the fluffy language of encouragement and behaviour. And I think that more radicalness might need to be there too.
Well, thanks, Jonathan. That's very thoughtful. There's a lot there, as always. And I think a lot of what you say is right. Here are my slight hesitations. Firstly, on that last point, yeah, of course, there should be legislation for a relocalized political economy, but there isn't going to be, at least not soon enough and not seriously enough. And we need to be honest about that too. See, that's really part of my fundamental point, that it isn't good enough anymore for Greens to say, we've got this fantastic program of radical, massive policy change, put us in power, and we can save the future. Because there is not time to bring that program into action, right? We needed to have Green governments in power across the world a generation ago. And if not a generation ago, then now. And what are the chances of a Green government being elected at the next general election in the UK? That's what you would need to have a policy like that. I mean, maybe if we're lucky and various things work out well, we'll have 2 or 3 MPs after the next election, and we'll be part of a probably Labour-led administration, and we can have some real influence. Will that influence even conceivably be enough to bring in the programme you've outlined? No, there's no chance in hell that it will be, right? And that is part of what we have to be honest about. Now, one of the implications of that, in terms of you talk about the inadequacy of kind of behaviour change alone and so forth, completely true. But what we also need to be readying for is mass action on the local level, which does not come through conventional political channels. And again, councillors could be in an influential position to start to lead that. We're moving into unprecedented times. When these climate disasters hit, which are virtually certainly going to hit Britain hard in the 2020s, they have potentially almost revolutionary consequences. Look at what's happened in the past when serious disasters have hit in places like Mexico City or San Francisco. I'm talking about various points in history with earthquakes, for example. The consequences have been literally pretty much revolutionary in terms of political change, in terms of bottom-up community reorganization. That's the kind of scale of events that may be about to occur to us in the 2020s. We need to be preparing the ground for those and being ready to respond to those. Now, turning to the part of your question about global inequality and global injustice, there I think I'm more completely on the same page as you. And this is a very important dimension of the argument that I've been trying to make here with you this morning. Let me bring it out in this way. The fact that we are not going to stay below 1.5 degrees is a screaming climate injustice. This fact will impact hardest on the global south. We need to be ready to leverage the impact and the importance of the horror of that fact So some people say to me things like, you can't give up on 1.5 degrees. Giving up on 1.5 degrees is a death sentence for the Global South. And my response is, it's not about me giving up on 1.5 degrees. It's about the fact that we are not going to stay below 1.5 degrees. And that is a straight deduction, as I indicated earlier, from the things that are absolutely explicit in the IPCC reports this year. Without deep, rapid, immediate cuts worldwide in emissions, we are not going to stay below 1.5 degrees. There is no way in hell we are going to get deep, rapid, immediate worldwide cuts in emissions. Right? We are moving on balance this year in the opposite direction, tragically. So what we need to be saying is, this that our so-called leaders are doing is a screaming, unprecedented climate injustice, right? And we need to be mobilizing on the back of that. And part of what we need to be mobilizing for is massive adaptation assistance for the Global South and massive loss and damages financial assistance for the Global South. And that's how we could start to get a little bit more justice. Yeah, a little bit more global justice. Yeah, if we use these facts and pressing them into people's uncomfortable awareness, yeah, to leverage a greater degree of adaptation assistance and loss and damage assistance for the Global South. That's how we start to get global justice, a little bit of global justice. The profound error that is being made at present is that by staying with the fantasy that we're going to stay in the safe zone below 1.5 degrees, global justice organizations and green parties and so on and so forth are, I'm afraid, complicit in this terrible injustice that is being done, because they are not making the most of this unprecedented communications opportunity, which is, you know, the flip side of this tragic crisis of us moving out of the safe zone.
Thanks, Rupert. If people can keep their questions sort of very short, we'll try and get around as many people as possible. And if the answers could be a little bit more precise.
Okay, fair enough.
Over there, and if you could give your name and your local council. Lady, you had a hand up earlier on.
Great.
You did? Did you not?
Well, I wasn't aware of it.
That's fine. All right.
But she's got a question now.
I'm going to have a question.
Oh, right. Okay. All right. I'll just indicate to you, and you just come up with a question. Okay.
My name is Jill Perry. I'm a newly elected councillor to the Shadow Authority of Cumberland, in a ward that was traditionally Conservative, but has got lots of Green people in it and lots of Green things going on. But I also represent Aldale and Copeland Green Party, and we're expecting before the 7th of July, so probably Monday or Tuesday of this week, a decision on a coal mine.
Oh, yes.
And we're expecting it to be, yes, it can go ahead. Now, it's coking coal for steel, it's not for electricity, but that makes no difference whatsoever. And as a newly elected councillor, I've kind of been thinking, oh, well, I suppose that's that then. But from listening to you, I'm hearing that actually I should be planning to go and do non-violent direct action as soon as the work is started. Am I right?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so to repeat the question, as a as a Cumberland councillor, should this lady be taking preparatory steps for non-violent direct action against the new coal mine that is likely to go ahead in Cumbria? And yes, you'll be unsurprised to hear that my answer would be, yeah, I would love you to. I think you should. I think that is what we are called to do. You know, this is about what we're called to do at this unique moment in history, and what we have a unique power in relation to. That's what I've been trying to describe in my talk, right? People will listen to us because we're Greens. People will listen to and be surprised by councillors who are saying, who are willing to be brave enough to say, you know what, the conventional democratic mechanisms have failed us here. Right? And this is a historic criminal act that is about to be perpetuated against future generations by this coal mine going ahead. As you say, there's no excuse that it's coking coal. There is now possible to produce steel using renewable energy. They're doing it in Sweden. And in any case, we should, of course, be producing a lot less steel than we are. So the short answer is yes. And just to make a generalization from that in relation to what Greens Can are calling for, the Greens Climate Activist Network. As I say, do look us up online if you're interested or impressed by anything I've said this morning. We're suggesting, among other things, that sometimes the way that Extinction Rebellion and offshoots like Insulate Britain and Just Stop Oil have acted has not been as smart, as com-savvy as it might have been. Sometimes it's alienated people unnecessarily. We think that Greens, and certainly Green councillors, taking these kinds of actions, non-violent direct actions, could do so in a way which was less likely to alienate people. We would be more likely to do it in a way that was really intelligently kind of connecting the issue with our action, more likely to do actions that inherently make sense to people, like what happened in Sheffield with the attempt to defend the trees that ended up being partially successful. And if we do that, if we succeed in doing non-violent direct actions that really make sense to people and that really resonate with people, well, then that will enable us to grow and remain popular. And that's how we break this alleged dichotomy between power and principle.
Thanks. I will actually choose somebody this time who's actually put the hand up. You.
I'm a similar case study.
Your name?
Oh, sorry, I'm Paul Bowers, and I'm the sole councillor on Cheshire West and Chester Unitary Authority. We have an enormous, unseen environmental issue with blue hydrogen at the Stanlow Oil refinery. It's sold as a green project, decarbonising industry in the northwest. It's bullshit beyond belief, but it's a complicated argument, very hard to get out. So I'm the only person on the council who stands against that, shoehorn into every speech I make, and I try and be a bigger pain in the ass as possible. But also, in April, I was arrested for Just Stop Oil at the Tamworth Oil Depot. And in October, Just Stop Oil are planning actions. I'm lobbying for actions at Stanlow to bring this to attention. Am I better? And also, more complicated than that, I'm up for a re-election next May. So I'm just embarking on Target to Win. Not that much gusto, I've got to be completely honest. You know, I'm one part of me is looking disgruntled by a pothole, the other one's getting arrested on a tank.
Yeah.
What should I do? Should I get arrested even if it means that I lose the election? My ward is opposite Stanlow. Lots of people. It's a very small C Conservative. It's a classic Target to Win. There's not people don't buy the Guardian in my ward. They don't like gypsies. They quite like oil, but they like me looking disgruntled and what do I do? I feel like I'm betraying my friends who've worked so hard to get me elected, just because do I get an ego rush from getting arrested? What's my better position to take?
Yeah. So we need to try to bring some of these. What's that?
Repeat the question.
Yeah. Okay. So the question is a somewhat similar one. Facing a blue hydrogen project in Cheshire, should the Green Party's lone councillor on Cheshire Council risk arrest to oppose this project? A couple of thoughts, and again, you know, obviously I can't make these difficult decisions for you, but a couple of thoughts. Firstly, in terms of the situation that you face and that you also face, and a number of people in this room probably, these small C Conservative voters, we need to try to bring them gently on a kind of a journey, but we need to do that. So it's not about kind of sticking something kind of really kind of harsh right up in their face. It's about getting them to understand that you are the same person who is interested in their potholes and who is concerned for nature and for their children and for conserving our heritage, for conserving nature and life and so on and so forth. There are ways in with small C Conservative voters, and many of you will be very familiar with this, especially if you live in such wards as I now do as well. There are ways into this kind of agenda which are not as full on as kind of, we have to completely decarbonize now. So, you know, try to use some of those kind of rhetorical ways in. In terms of the actual issue that you face, well, I would encourage you to consider the possibility that if you manage to do this in a way that, that resonates and that makes sense to people and that uses these kinds of rhetorical tropes and so on and so forth, then you might end up in a similar position to Alison Teal. I'm not saying your situation is as easy as hers. I think it's harder. But I think it is possible that you could end up standing up as someone who even if some people think, oh, you know, he's a bloody, you know, extremist or do-gooder or something, I think it's possible that some of those people will come to have a grudging respect for you, and that they still may vote for you when it actually comes to it. Consider the way that Extinction Rebellion in the Great April Rebellion in 2019 had the success that we had. We blocked streets, blocked intersections, blocked Waterloo Bridge, etc. And for the first few days, you know, the torrent of messages from the media was, you know, how dare these people, who the hell are they, etc., etc. By doing this, we forced a national conversation. And by about the end of the first week, the tone was starting to turn, and quite a lot of people in the media and so on were starting to say things a bit like, well, you know, you've got to admire their tenacity, and you know, maybe that if enough of them really are deeply, desperately concerned about this, maybe they've got a point, etc. And by the end of the second week, you know, the public mood in the country had transformed. It wasn't like Extinction Rebellion was suddenly beloved of everybody, but climate consciousness had suddenly shifted to a higher level, and there was, as I say, a kind of grudging respect, and that may be enough to enable you to keep quite a lot of those voters who've got you where you are, or you never know, maybe it'll even accelerate you into a more powerful position than you had before. So consider the possibility that it might be like that, and also consider the possibility that, you know, at the end of the day, you do need to look yourself and your children in the eye.
A really great example I saw was the West Berkshire councillor, Steve Masters, who was up a tree in Rolled Darl Wood, which was under threat from HS2, and he joined his council meeting online from so 50 foot up a tree.
Nice.
There we go. So
Alan Borgard, North Hertfordshire and Stevenage Green Party. I haven't become a councillor just yet. If we can't avoid a temperature rise of 1.5 degrees Celsius by the year 2050, what is the best scenario we can realistically hope for in terms of temperature rise, and how this impacts on Britain? I'm particularly concerned about the erosion to our coasts in particular, and the increasing intensity of heat waves in the summer.
okay, I'll take another one.
Yep.
Thank you. A lot of people are councillors and XR activists. You know, it goes together to some extent. When I go to my local XR meeting, I look around the room, they're all intelligent people, they're all following the council debates, they're working out how they can ask questions to the council, and then I say to them, are you prepared to stand next May? And they say, no, I can't bear sitting in meetings. What do I tell them?
It's great. You won't have to go to many meetings. Everything's going to be fine. Yeah. It's only one month. Yeah.
Yeah, so on the temperature question, just briefly, as I say, I think it's entirely possible for us to stay below 2 degrees still. And, you know, that would be a lot better than not staying below 2 degrees. But, you know, in a way, that really isn't the point. I mean, the point is we're out of the safe zone. We need to do everything that we can to stop ourselves going further out of the safe zone. And we need to do everything that we can to protect ourselves and those that we love and those that are most vulnerable, including in the global south, from what is here and from what is coming. And, you know, that's a kind of quite simple message that people can understand, really. You know, most ordinary people, they don't understand about 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees. We can explain to them that 1.5 is a proxy for safety. And they understand the basic idea, obviously, of safety. And they understand the idea that they are not being kept in that safe zone. They understand, therefore, or could understand, if we're brave enough to come out with this message, that they have been let down, that their trust has been betrayed in a more fundamental sense than they've yet realized, by politicians and to some extent also by scientists and even activists who have not been honest with them about how bad the predicament is and the way that we're out of that safe zone. In terms of the question about XR folk and potentially becoming councillors, I think one has to be pragmatic here. I think probably the thing to do is to focus your efforts on the small number of rebels who might actually be amenable to becoming a councillor. So that's what I've been doing in Norfolk, speaking to literally a couple of rebels who I think have really kind of potentially got it in them to kind of go for the long haul and the long meetings and everything else that we know is the bitter reality of this wonderful job that you all have.
I mean, the serious answer on the meeting stuff is meetings are much less boring if you're in them saying green stuff. So, no, if you can cut that, that'd be great. But I'll take two.
Hi, Tom Pickering, Stroud. I don't disagree with direct action. I got elected to sit some trees. I do think, unfortunately, with great respect, your analysis is about 30 years out of date, Rupert. It's a long way behind the curve. And I think scientific predictions are we're looking at 3 by the end of the century. That's important. But my biggest criticism, and it's just a question really to put to you, is why on earth do you keep using the word hope? Hope is, in my opinion, something that comes out of religious doctrine or something. You should be reusing the word courage and action, not the word hope. That's my question.
Okay, well,
hope is gone.
That's an unusual criticism, the bit about 30 years out of date. I mean, most people say that what's more likely is that this analysis is before its time. It's before its time in the sense that most people are still finding it very difficult to admit how bad the situation is, how powerless we are in it through the provincial electoral system, etc. That, all credit to you, Simon, if you were ahead of this curve, 30 years ago. But I think if you were, then you are, dare I say it, extremely unusual. So I would say that actually I would be, delighted and astonished if it turned out that what I'm saying is out of date. I suspect that the truth is more on the other foot. In terms of hope, look, what I tried to stress was that the question is, what specifically do you can we still hope for? Now, you're right to say that if hope is a passive attitude, then that still remains a dangerous thing. But I think I've made it extremely clear that what I'm talking about is hope that manifests through action. And that actually, as my friend and colleague Greta Thunberg says, hope is irrelevant unless there is action. And when there is action, then hope will start to spring up everywhere. So what I've been talking about is, if you will, in the locution used by my colleagues Joanna Macy and Chris Johnston, active hope. And what active hope really means is you take action and thereby you create hope. So I think really the difference between us on that is purely semantic.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Rupert. Just a few observations. Sorry, yeah, Caroline from West Berkshire. So my colleague Steve, he was actually did a meeting from the lock-on as well, which was hilarious. You should have seen the Tories' faces when they could see policemen walking around behind them. They were asking really banal questions about potholes or whatever. So it was great. Yeah, I think one of the things about being truthful with people, I think what we also need to be careful of is if we put people off electoral politics, we've also got this twin problem at the moment with fascism. So we've got Roe versus Wade in America and all kinds of other things. And I think they're going to try and stop us focusing on climate change and really fighting all of the battles that we've had to fight before in the past.
Yeah.
So that's a real danger. I think one of the things we can do is deal with the potholes, do positive projects like planting woods, get involved in direct action in local areas. I think if we do all of those things, and it is a lot of work, then we restore active hope, if we use that phrase, for the local people, and they will vote for us. And I think if you do direct action locally, I think people will still vote for you if they see you doing the other stuff as well. So I think we need to stay positive. I think those sort of projects we do, like planting woods, are really good for us as well, because I know psychologically it can be really difficult being a councillor. And if we can go away from the meetings, fighting the Tories day after day, and go and do something positive like planting wood, that makes us feel a bit better as well. And I think we do need to look after ourselves more than we do. And just an observation on the number of people who understand, we find that incredibly frustrating. We've only got 3 people in West Berkshire, but we've calculated we might only need to get 1 or 2 more next year to get the balance of power. And that in itself is probably almost as good as getting an absolute majority if we could play our cards right when it comes to negotiations. So I would say to people, if you can't get enough people to stand locally, don't give up hope. Focus on a few people, a few really good, hard-working people, rather than trying to stand loads of people. So sorry, it's not really questions, it's observations.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, thank you, Carolyn. Thanks for the great work you're doing. Yeah, the point about Actually, I've lost it slightly now. What was your question again?
Great observations.
The thing about fascism, I think we need.
Yes, yeah, okay, yeah, I've got it. Again, the message that I'm offering here, there's a tiny bit of complexity to it, only a tiny bit. The message is it's not enough to just do electoral politics. Most people think that what politics and democracy is just elections. And what I'm suggesting is we've now reached a point where it's imperative for the Green Party to say and to mean, and maybe this point should have come 30 years ago, but we still haven't actually reached it, where it's, and we need to, for the Green Party to say and to mean, we need to do more than that. There is no purely electoral representative democracy route to ecologism. The world is not going to be saved by just voting for the Green Party. And the Green Party needs to do more than just encourage people to vote. But we still need to encourage people to vote. And as I said quite clearly, and this is one of the really exciting paradoxical dimensions of the Greens Can strategy, it is possible that if we take something like this brave, courageous route, then we will encourage more people to vote for us than ever have before, right? It is possible that what Alison showed in Sheffield could be modelled across the country and could propel us to closer to power than we ever have been before. And that is an exciting possibility, and that is an exciting reality. And in fact, one more sentence, just to underscore that point. I think it's the only possible route to that. I think we have no other credible route to rapid growth in Green Party democratic representation.
Andrew, can you come back into the camera?
Okay.
I think we need to finish, actually.
Right, okay. One more. I suppose the other thing about Green votes is that they're the denial of votes for others. So even if you don't elect a Green, you're denying votes to others, and that's also bad.
Yeah. I'm Martin from Tunbridge, Norway, Kent. Our local party that we were involved in the protest. I was in a tree a few months before getting elected. So I think there's a real. I've been arrested as part of an exile as well, and that the local Conservative Party tried to use that as a weapon. But I think it's important that when you've got elected representatives who try to bring motions, they try to do it in the constitutional way, and they've been rebuffed.
Yes.
Where this is failing, that the councillors who can afford to get arrested or protest do so. But what I'm really worried about is what's happening with the crime bill, because there's a consequence. If you rack up enough fines, you could be barred from standing. So what's coming in the next year or so is going to be really interesting, because that we've got to be very aware that the consequences are getting more and more severe.
Yeah. Yeah, so this is a great question to end on, because it's a huge question of principle, but also a very practical question. So look, it's clear that that the green waves in the last few years, the last several local elections, etc., have been on the coattails of XR and Greta. That is clear. It's clear that that Greens, a number of you are in this audience here have already been saying you've been doing this. It's clear that Greens are already combining protest and electoral methods. And what we in Greens can think is that could be ramped up, and that if it was, it could be more effective in certain ways than what XR has done. Because as I say, I think we would be much less likely to make the kind of massive bloopers that occurred at Canning Town or Trinity College Lawn, etc., that have besmirched the name of XR. So that's what I put it to you that we ought to do. And you're right, there are going to be really difficult issues to do with judgment calls of, oh God, you know, how will this play, and what about the fines? And if I go to prison for long enough, I'll be thrown out of being a councillor anyway, and so on and so forth. But here's the thing: if you start to imagine this strategy really working, and I think it could really work, and I think it's the only thing now that could really work. If you start to imagine this strategy really working, you could start to imagine quite large numbers of people getting involved and getting behind it, because it would be less off-putting than people have found XR or Insulate Britain and so on and so forth. I mean, you start to get really, really large numbers, and this, of course, was the experience in the big XR rebellions of 2019. it actually starts to get really difficult for the police to cope with at all. And they end up de-arresting huge numbers of people, and they end up being taken to court and having loads and loads, hundreds of convictions being overturned and so on and so forth. So that's the kind of positive situation that we actually could be moving into if we're courageous enough to go down this path.
So thank you, Rupert. I think it's really important for us to think deeply about why we are Greens, why we want to get elected, what's the point of it all, what is it we're trying to achieve, because we're not Liberal Democrats, are we? So yeah, that's my thought on that. So let's all give a big round of applause.